In part 1, chapter 26 of Don Quixote, Don Quixote tromps around the woods writing sad poetry and commending himself to God. Meanwhile, Sancho Panza stops at the inn they left just days before. Pero Perez and Master Nicholas are there and ask him about the whereabouts of Don Quixote. He gives up his master's location rather quickly and tells them all about the adventures they've had thus far. They ask to see the letter meant for Dulcinea del Toboso, and Sancho Panza realizes Don Quixote still has the journal. He recites the letter for the men so they can transcribe it. Pero Perez and Master Nicholas realize Don Quixote's madness was so passionate that it had swept away this poor man's sanity. When Sancho Panza steps out of the room, the men concoct a plan to lure Don Quixote home, which involves Pero Perez dressing like a damsel in distress. In part 1, chapter 27, Pero Perez and Master Nicholas borrow disguises from the innkeeper's wife before heading back into the mountains with Sancho Panza. When Sancho Panza goes off to find Don Quixote, Pero Perez and Master Nicholas meet Cardenio. Sancho Panza has already appraised them of Cardenio's story, but they want to hear the rest of it. Cardenio is tricked into going away for a few days to secure money for the horses Don Fernando wants to buy. He receives a letter from Lucinda, which says she's marrying Fernando in 2 days. After a brief meeting with Lucinda, in which she promises, before they see me married, they will see me dead, Cardenio sneaks into the church. The vows are exchanged, and Lucinda faints in Don Fernando's arms. Don Fernando reads a letter found in Lucinda's bodice and looks troubled. Cardenio is so angry that Lucinda actually married Don Fernando, he doesn't wait around to see what happens next. Cardenio's love triangle with Lucinda and Don Fernando brings up the notion of star-crossed lovers forced apart by circumstances and deception, a staple of popular literature for thousands of years. Cardenio and Lucinda's situation somewhat mirrors that of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, written about a decade before Don Quixote was published. Both stories are about lovers who would rather kill themselves than be forced apart. Unlike Shakespeare's story, however, this one doesn't end in tragedy.